Welcome to the red eye shift. It's a bit radical, all right. 10:30 on the Sunday morning. Las 10:30 de la madrugada, as we might say. So I'm gonna talk to you about our little cellular telephone project in Oaxaca in Mexico. Called Rhizomatica. And the title of the talk is Being an Alternative When There Is No Alternative, because where we operate there is no cellular service in general. One or two little pockets, but most of the region has no cell phones at all. So there's some details there. If you want to get bored with what I'm saying, you can look at our wiki. Please don't, do it later. Our code's on GitHub, and some people from the office occasionally send tweets about what we're up to. And the webpage itself is in a process of being transformed. So, for me, this all started a few years ago when I had a conversation with Peter Bloom. We were talking about radios and things in the communities in Oaxaca, and Peter happened to mention to me that you could do a cell phone base station. I was like, yeah, no way. She said, yeah, there's this thing called OpenBTS, which is around, and these things called software radios. And I was thinking, wow, that's really cool, because two-way radios are a thing. You can buy VHF radio sets and set up a repeater tower or something, have communications around the community, but VHF radios are reasonably expensive, whereas cell phones are dirt cheap. You could buy them on eBay or whatever in lots of 100, and but you can't use them because it's all locked down and there's no access to the spectrum, and you need licenses, etc., etc. But I was thinking as well about how actually, just related to some of the stuff that was being said yesterday, cell phones are in fact two-way radios. It's just really for the first time in the history of all that stuff about what was being said yesterday about the Titanic and radio rules and etiquette and people not being allowed to use the spectrum because we all need to be nice to each other and we need etiquette. And when time division multiple access comes along and the computers control who gets to talk when on the network, we don't really need that stuff anymore. So from a technical point of view, controlling who has access to transmit on the spectrum, that whole thing about needing to control it doesn't really fly anymore. And the cell phone was, it was like a change. It was like, no, you can't use a radio. No, you can't transmit. No, you're not allowed. You need a license. You need to be a ham. You need to do this. All of a sudden, the cell phone comes along. It's like, here, everybody, have radios. Talk to each other. So, we were interested in that, and I was thinking, wow, wouldn't it be really cool, if people up in the mountains when they were out in the fields working or whatever could just take a cell phone with them, and if they needed to call home, they could just call home, and wouldn't that be great? Why can't they do that? Well, they can't do that because the spectrum's locked down and there's no license. So I went off and with that idea in my head, and Peter started working with existing community radio stations in the region. There's quite a lot of them, the indigenous communities in Oaxaca, just very briefly, kind of run their own show. They have some level of autonomy from the federal government, and they have this thing called usos y costumbres, which is like the traditional laws, community law. So as part of that, they don't, for one thing, is they don't really recognize private property. You can't go there and buy land as such, and most people in the community, they get allocated land and they have certain obligations to the community in return for that. I'm not an expert in it, but it's a different thing. So where we operate that's very important, especially in what happened subsequently with getting access to spectrum. Hello everybody on the internet, by the way. I think there's a chat thing if there's anybody watching, I don't know if anybody's actually watching the stream, but if there is, I know there's a chat thing in the stream, and if you want to type some questions in there, we'll maybe get them later on. So, in general, in Mexico, there's a pretty poor internet, mobile phone service or communication service. And in those communities, this is what you tend to have, is a bunch of loudspeakers up on a tower somewhere, and sometimes people have a satellite phone system, so if somebody wants to call in, there's a lot of migration from communities in Oaxaca, especially to the United States. So if somebody wants to call home, they call this satellite phone number, which is quite expensive, and then somebody would pick that up, and then they get on the speaker and they'd say, hey, there's a phone call for whoever it is, and they've got to walk down from their house to the middle of the town and pick up the phone, and by that time they've clocked up quite a number of minutes at an expensive rate. And everybody in the town knows that they got a phone call, and everybody in the town got woken up or whatever to let them know that there's a phone call coming in. So even apart from that, the quality of mobile service has changed a little bit in the last few years, possibly due to some community cellular initiatives, maybe not, maybe yes. It's pretty expensive in general, especially related to the acquisition power, relative economy, the kind of money that people tend to have. So, generally things like prepay mobile phone services, you don't really get any call billing breakdown. It's just, they just take your money and they don't really tell you what it was for. If you've got any queries about that, you generally tend to need to go to a client center, and where they ask you a whole bunch of personal details and don't really give you any satisfactory explanation as to why all your credit disappeared. If you look for information on the prepaid plans and on their websites and everything, it's usually very vague, it's often inaccurate, out of date. This is a weird thing for me, coming from Europe, is that SMS messages are incredibly reliable in Europe. I've actually left my home country for about 3 months and came back and turned the phone on and all the messages came in. Whereas in Mexico, this isn't a thing. SMSs are just like something you send off and maybe it'll get there, maybe it won't. It's really common to excuse, amongst all the other things that you can have excuses, I never got the message, and it's totally believable. They really don't arrive. And the whole industry is really based on spam, a lot of spam. You get an incredible amount of spam on your mobile phone. Telefonica Movistar have this thing where they sell broadcast messages to pop up a little thing on your phone that says, hey, do you want to pay 40 pesos to get like 10 megabytes of internet for the next two days? And if you're not really careful and you accidentally press the OK button, that's it. You get billed and you get this service. Even if you've already got that service, you get it again. And they send all kinds of terrible things, and Beyonce ringtones, and it's just constant. They wake you up at 3 o'clock in the morning with spam messages saying, hey, send something to this number, and then you get charged 15 pesos for writing back to it saying, no, leave me alone. And they do things like, if you go to buy a 3G internet modem, they make you buy insurance for it, which you can cancel, but in order to cancel it, you have to actually ring up the company and pester them and tell them to please take you off this thing, that kind of stuff. And lack of coverage. Coverage is reasonably okay in the urbanized areas, but when you go outside of that, off the main roads, it's not, just not really there. So that's my rant about bad mobile service. So me and Peter were kind of annoyed about this, and we said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could do something? So here's a screen grab I just took from OpenCell ID this morning. I thought I'd stick that in there. Maybe a little mouse thing. No, I have a finger. This is Oaxaca City, and this is pretty much the region where we work. Right? If you're familiar with OpenCell ID, these are the numbers of cell towers that have been mapped in these areas. Not saying that all the cell towers in the area are probably not on the map, because people don't tend to drive up around here with open cell ID apps open on their phones. This one I mapped. And our cell towers are not showing up on the map because we're using a different mobile operator code. And I talked to the folks in Open Cell ID. They said, oh yeah, we see your entries coming in. They've been marked as suspicious. And I asked them to stick our details into the database so that they'll show up. So I don't know, maybe next time I drive up to the mountains and send up an update, maybe it'll appear on the map. But so you can see there's not really an awful lot of coverage in there. And another thing which was really interesting to find out when we started this, there's a town somewhere here, maybe called Tepec, and Klawi has a Telcel, Carlos Slim America Mobile Tower since a few years ago. But all the people who live in this region, they're all from Oaxaca, right? And they generally tend to move to Oaxaca City if they go out, come down from the mountains, go someplace. And Oaxaca has an area code. And up here, this is the state of Veracruz, which has another area code. So Tlahuitoltepec, which is here, where everybody's got Oaxaca area code phones, when they gave them the tower, they told them, oh, you know what? We can't give you a Oaxaca area code because you're too close to Veracruz, so we're going to give you a Veracruz area code, right? Now what this means is that this got abolished recently, but a few years ago in Mexico, they have this interstate roaming. If you leave your state, you have to pay roaming charges to make a call or receive a call, which meant that if you're in Oaxaca and you want to call somebody in Tlahui, you have to call a Veracruz number, which means that you have to pay long distance charges, and the person receiving the call in Tlahuitoltepec has to pay incoming roaming charges. So that meant that a call, even for the people who are in Tlahui with their 951 numbers, when they want to call out, they're calling out, paying outgoing roaming charges, and then the person who's receiving the call. So two people in the same room in Tlahuitoltepec had to pay long distance to call each other. Right now, if you kind of think about where we are in modern call routing and everything, it's a little bit absurd to suggest that just because a cell tower is physically located in these mountains here, it means that it has to have a Veracruz area code. So anyway, one of the things that happened recently in the Mexican mobile industry is they actually just abolished the whole roaming thing, and they just set a national rate, which was brilliant, because it was costing them about $1 a minute to make phone calls. They changed that now. It's 85 cents of a peso. So whatever. That is a lot less. Okay, more satellite stuff and the speakers for announcing calls. So we're probably going to need to speed up a little bit. I thought I was going to go much faster with this. I had this thing of the three-way hack of what we actually did. We, out of the work of the radio stations, the community radio stations, we went to the communities and presented the idea of a cell phone network for them, just really thinking about the idea that locally, inside the community, they could make calls. And we did demos, and we showed all that stuff to them, right? So in some of these communities, they had asked the major providers various times to provide cell phone service, and the major providers had said, no thanks, there's not enough of you, and it's not a viable business proposal for us, so we're not interested, you can just stay incomunicados. But there's this thing in the concessions that they have, which is called universal service, which says that the mobile companies are supposed to give everybody service, which they weren't doing. So we kind of took that to the SCT, the Secretaría de Comunicaciones y Transportes, which is the body that manages licenses, manages the spectrum. And Peter went in there one morning, and I met him in Mexico City for coffee, and it was like he was going into this belly of the beast to go and ask these people, said, please can I have a mobile phone license to operate in Mexico? And I was like, well, compañero, it's been good knowing you, we'll see you later. And he went into the office with our lawyer, who knows some folks in the SCT. And it just so happened there was this OECD report on the desk that morning criticizing Mexico for lack of penetration in the mobile market, and there was so many billions of dollars that they were losing every year, revenue, because they weren't connecting everybody. And so Peter walks in, and these guys were like, wow, I see, we have this thing here, it's criticizing Mexico, we need to do something about it, and then you come in and you tell us you want to go and connect those communities, and what's more, you don't even want us to give you anything, you just want us to give your permission. I said, well, hey, yeah, I think we can work together. So that was a sort of a surprise, and things went pretty well from there. There's really, there's been a lot of, what's the word? At the government level, people aren't against this, and what we're doing. So on the technical side of all that stuff, at the same time as what we were doing, there's all this SDR development going on, which we heard a lot about yesterday, and two projects, OpenBTS and the Osmocom project, both coming out of investigative research, really. OpenBTS kind of has its roots in doing some work on the possibilities of surveillance on GSM systems, and Osmocom has its roots in trying to fuzz GSM systems and see what's wrong with them and find out where the security holes are. Osmocom really, as I understand, is a project that wasn't designed to be used as a working telephone system. It was more designed to just to investigate. But all this stuff came along, and so we did these meetings, told the people, mostly men, in the communities what was going on, and they thought about it and they agreed to help us. This thing is really important about the lack of private property, because it ended up, it has to do with the fact that they were able to claim usage of the spectrum as part of the territory. And because it's not private, it's available for use. Can't really go into that much more time. And there's some cats, because the internet likes cats. And they're sitting there on their not private property. Okay, and so really quickly, as all this is kind of going on, myself and a contemporary artist pulled down some funding for an exhibition to buy one of these things, the HSN 210, which is a software-defined radio that allowed us to run an open BTS system in Finland as part of an art exhibition. Chose Finland from the Nokia connection and stuff. This idea was just to make a free mobile phone network. So we managed to get our hands on this thing, which then we were able to take to the communities in Oaxaca and do a demonstration so that they could see. They could actually use the phones in the community. Now, pictures of that later. Which was important because apart from that, we were just talking theory. We were just saying, hey, we can come and we can put mobile phone network in your community. But when we brought this thing up there, it's only just in the town square that you could get access to it. But they could actually make calls and see that it worked, and that really helped the whole thing to get pushed along. So that was great to be able to get that unit at the time. So, right. Jumping on a little bit here into after we set up the base stations in the communities and we have local calls working, we needed some way to be able to get out of the community onto the rest of the world and to interconnect the villages. So there's a number of internet providers that are operating up there in the Sierra, and they're mostly using 2.4 or 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi links from mountaintop to mountaintop. And believe it or not, even up there in the mountains, they get congestion and interference. Sometimes, some area will go down, and they'll say, "Oh, it's because somebody else is up there operating something on some frequency," and it's interfering with the links. So we also get a lot of service outages. Right now the rainy season's just kind of finished up, so we should get a bit of a break from that for the next 6 months or so. But we get a lot of lightning strikes directly onto equipment and also on the power lines, which takes down power, or it can cause surges that take out equipment. And even the communities themselves sometimes cut off the power to towers. That happened in one region where it's just like land disputes, or disputes over paying rent for the tower. There's a whole kind of local political thing that needs to get managed there in order for that stuff to work. Most of the time it works great, but it can happen. And essentially what we're doing with the backhaul is that we just bring it back into Oaxaca City, where it connects to the really terrible internet service that we have there, and we try to run SIP voice over IP calls out. And we have a lot of problems with that, and it's kind of weird. I mean, I've even seen things where it seems to be a little bit like as if the traffic originating in Mexico is being punished in certain data centers in the US. Because we have a data center in Dallas, and we run various services out of that data center, but one of the things we have is a VPN. So if I connect with two VPNs, we use Tink and we use OpenVPN. If I connect into the OpenVPN, for example, and traffic to, we actually noticed this with the Ubuntu servers doing updates, that from our office in Oaxaca, it was really, really, really slow. So we connected to VPN and it's fine, super fast speeds. So I started looking at the routers and where the packets were getting lost and dropped. And even though it's taking pretty much the same route from Dallas to its end location, the traffic that originates on the Cable Más Mexico network was getting dropped off in one particular route when it was originating from Mexico. When it was originating from Dallas, it wasn't. So it's like, oh, what's going on there? So maybe there's priority for US originating traffic and not for other countries. But it could be pretty bad at times. So that's just interesting about the internet. So we're looking at options, and for us to get our own fiber connection is difficult because there's a kind of a monopoly on who owns it, and they don't really want to sell it. But even if we did, there's a price. It's 1,000 Mexican pesos per symmetrical megabit. So one of the providers that we use, some good people called Protocol, who run the Wi-Fi links up into the Sierra, they have 200 megabits, I think, of fiber symmetrical. So they're paying like 200,000 Mexican pesos a month for that, which is a significant cost. Something that, I don't know, we'll figure this stuff out as time goes on. So we're looking at ways of, there's TV white space stuff. Maybe we can do something with that to be able to get the data to somewhere else where we can get better connections. And it's kind of a problem. This is, interfacing with the old network, with the new network, what we're trying to do. We don't really have any choice but to use the internet for a backhaul for the moment to interconnect with the PSTN. So this is kind of what it looks like where we work. Not all the time. Sometimes it's cloudy. Getting access to the PSTN is kind of impossible. It's very expensive and complicated. We need to put equipment in all of the telco points of presence, as far as I understand. And you need to make agreements with the some international organization. You need to make agreements with them about availability. You've got a lot of responsibility if you actually want to get assigned a number or an area codes and get on the real PSTN system as such. So we use these DID numbers, which we generally, because people who are interested in calling into the communities, or most of them they're either in the United States or in Mexico, so we generally get one US number and one Mexico City number. Unfortunately, we can't get DID numbers in Oaxaca right now. They're not available. Nobody does it. But so these DID numbers, if you call them up, they connect you directly to the PBX in the community, which answers and says, welcome to the community of whatever it is, and you get an opportunity to dial in the number that you want to connect to, and it rings the cell phone in the community. Connection, right. So there's this really works. It's kind of, this is Google Earth with the elevation thing, the, what do you call it, the accentuation of the elevation parameter. You can turn it up so that the topography is increased. But you can kind of see what it looks like up there. But over there is Oaxaca City. And these places are not really very far, but it takes 6 to 8 hours to drive up here because it's all like this. Imagine if you want to get from here to here, you've probably got to go all the way down in there, and it's just very mountainous. There's Tele de Castro, that was the first one. We've got a system here in Yaviche. There's one here in Tabaz, one here in Villa Alta. So that's kind of what the terrain looks like. That's what we're dealing with in terms of trying to get internet up there. So, what's next? Okay. Things are working pretty well. We have this thing with intervillage calling where it's really intervillage roaming, where a cell phone goes to another village network. It logs on there, so the system needs to know where it is so that the calls can get routed there. So we use this RIAC NoSQL thing. And it has these 2 out of 3 type thing where you can have, this RIAC, you can have consistency of data or the availability of the system in order to update or partition tolerance. You can't have all 3 of those things, supposedly. So that causes a bit of a problem for us because these systems are designed to really not have an awful lot of partitions, but we get a lot of partitions because the network goes down a lot. So what that means is that sometimes the system's not available for update, so a phone that roams to another community won't get tagged as being back in its home community when it gets back. And all that would kind of go away if the internet connections were more consistent, but they're not. We're dealing with it as best we can, and something I need to look into a little bit more, but RIAC seems to be what we're using for the moment. But it is a 2 out of 3 thing. I think I was going to try to make a joke about that when I was doing this up last night. Yeah. It's like 2 out of 3, you can have wine, beer, and tequila, choose 2. Yeah. Or just stick with mezcal. So some of the other challenges that we're facing is that folks in the communities, even though what we do is we go there and we say, look, we can give you the system, but it's yours. They buy it. They outright buy the equipment and they outright buy the network. We just give them help to install it. We train people how to use the system. But people are used to this idea that, well, I have a telephone and you're the telephone company and you just make it work. And I give you my money and, if I have a problem, I shout at you. So sometimes people don't kind of get that it's theirs. And they have to have responsibility for it, and they come back to us a little bit too much. But we're working on that. Another thing is this economic sustainability for ourselves. What we're working on is this idea that each installation should be sustainable, and in some cases they are. They've got enough users. In other cases, it's a bit more difficult, depending on how much the lightning takes out of their equipment. Well, we're working on, we have some legal stuff that's going on where we've got a kind of umbrella organization that's managing the communities. For the moment, we have some financial support from the foundation, but the idea is within 1 or 2 years that the thing will grow enough that each community will be sustainable within itself, and then Rhizomatica as an organization can sustain itself out of that. And another thing is that we actually, kind of bizarre, but we do have a lot of difficulty finding tech people locally. Even in Mexico City, I have no organizations that have problems finding staff, finding hackers, finding tech people who want to work on this kind of thing. And we just have 2 Mexican people in the office out of 7. So, I mean, it's not really a big deal, but it would be nice if in some way that the whole thing would become more locally based. It would be the idea for the future, would be that there'd be more, it would become a Mexican project, you know, being run by Mexican people. Right. Oaxaca in the clouds. So the effects of what we've done, in general, people like it. There's lots of messaging going on. They make messages more than calls, loads of calls too. The community they also use to do like emergency broadcasts or information about weather. And the administration thing, you can just type in a message and send it to everybody. They've done community info broadcasts on the same by the same methods. On like I was saying, it was the original dream was that people would be able to do this. You know, maybe I think even it did actually happen. It was something that we had mentioned was that if somebody got bitten by a snake out in the fields, you know, they had no communications. That, you know, what would they do? And I think it did actually happen, and they were able to use the phones to call back and have people come out for help. So, let's go back to that. Yeah. So recently we also implemented emergency numbers, so they can, you know, each community can decide, you know, where those emergency calls can go. But they do have that service now in there. And they also use it in some cases with kind of community police. Not like the community police in Guerrero, if anyone's familiar with the Policía Comunitaria, it's more like just local authorities. So they use the telephone system a lot for community organizing and logistics.
I'm just going to put this on you because I'm getting a little bit of noise from next door.
Oh, okay.
It's good. Got pocket for that?
Yeah. Hello. So now I can whisper things to the internet. No internet.
Keep going on.
Right. So these are some of the things I wanted to look at as well. I get accused of being a pessimist a lot, which I'm not really. I just like to kind of start from the worst possibility and see where we can go from there. But there are some things that are happening with when you bring new technology into a community that hasn't had it before. Like I said in the introduction to this talk on the blurb, is that it's for some of us it's possibly a long way off to imagine a world without even a landline phone. You know, maybe we don't even have landline phones anymore, but we have phones all the time. You don't think too much about not being able to call somebody. Whereas these places where we're going and working, this is people who haven't had that really ever. You know? And all of a sudden you come in and you give them cell phones. So what happens? Well, one of the things that they responded to that question was that there is a really fast dependency generation. People just within a matter of weeks are like, when the phone system goes down, they're immediately at the office. What's wrong? I can't. It's not working. You know, I need to do this. I need. You know, and these were things that just a very brief time beforehand weren't a problem. So it's good. It's great when it's there and it works. But if it comes in and it works and it changes things and then it goes away, well, then people suffer. You know. So they also said to some extent it reduces face-to-face interaction, in that, you know, normally if you wanted to do anything at all before, you would need to go out, go onto the street, go down, talk to somebody, and now you can call them up, which means that, you know, it's worked really great for things like local taxi services. People can get called up, you know, and say, can you come up and give me a lift to wherever, and we do that. There's been some concern that this was just things that were noted down when we did this kind of survey. And this phone envy thing, you know, where they were concerned that, you know, people say, hey, my phone's better than yours, you know, look, I've got a cool phone and you've got that old thing, you know, but it apparently hasn't really been happening. But I just mentioned it there because it was something that came up. There has been some cases of abuse where, you know, people writing text messages to people who don't want to receive them anymore and get told, hey, go away, leave me alone. They're small communities, but maybe not everybody knows each other. And this, you know, young kids are got hands on their phones as well, and there's been a few things like this. And, you know, but it's generally been easily dealt with. People will come to the administration and office and say, look, I'm getting these text messages, or somebody's calling me and I don't want them to call me anymore. Or I don't know who this person is. They go into the office and say, look, can you tell me who has this number? Because, you know, they say, well, no, we're not going to tell anybody who's got what numbers, but, you know, we'll deal with it. And so then they would call in that person and they'd say, look, you know, stop messing around or we'll take away your service. In some communities, they've also imposed a 16-year-old limit on having a phone, for, you know, kind of obvious reasons. And in some places they've toyed with the idea of turning it off at certain hours, this kind of thing, which I don't think that really happens. But, you know, so in general, there have been some mild negative effects, but they're generally easy to deal with. There's happy people with their phones. So some of the possible effects that when I mentioned it earlier on is that the roaming charge just did get abolished. I don't know if that really has anything to do with us or not, but the industry took notice of what we did. And one of the main responses was to launch this idea of this small operator franchise. If you remember that cell ID map that I had earlier on, I don't bother bringing it up, but there was one black thing in the middle there. That's actually a Movistar, Telefonica Movistar tower, which is being run on this small operator franchise scheme. Which was basically, they said to people, look, if you want to put micro GSM stuff in the community, you deal with it, you buy the equipment, you install it, and we'll just connect you to our service, and then you can put credit into phones over our system, and you'll get like 40% of whatever it is. So keep charging the same exorbitant rates to everybody, you just get to take a massive cut out of it. Which wasn't really our idea at all. Our idea was that community should be able to own their network in all senses of the word. And of course the change in mobile tariffs that happened where, you know, they not only getting rid of the roaming but dropping down I think it was 4 pesos a minute down to 85 centavos. Just divide by 10. Whatever, 40 cents a minute of a dollar down to like less than 10 cents. And they also implemented per second billing, supposedly. The strange concept of per seconds. Okay, so over the last 3 years, all this stuff's happened. I personally sort of left. I needed to take a break, but I came back and about 3-4 months ago started working again. So this is what happened in the meantime. Couple of guys, Chabi and Telly, did some amazing work on writing some software for the network and for the administration end. So there's a whole system where you can log in, commission numbers, turn numbers off, give them access, mark them as being subscription paid or subscription not paid. You can put in credit for them to use the long distance system. You can see the call log, and all kinds of things like that. So we have more than 15 operating installations right now. I'm not going to say how many more than 15. It could be loads, could be not. We're kind of entering into a process right now of starting to attend to the many petitions that we've had for more installations. We took a break from doing new installations there just over the last few months because we had some. It was just too many little tiny problems with the systems that we wanted to iron out before we, expanded anymore. But we have also. Chabi's done some amazing work with Puppet, setting up a system that can be centrally administrated. So all of our code updates go through GitHub. GitHub gets pulled by Puppet, and Puppet pushes them out to all the systems. So we have all that up and running. We can push code changes out to all of our running installations pretty easily. So we've got more than 3,000 mobile phones operating. And during the last 3 years, we also got some very much appreciated support from the Shuttleworth Foundation. There's been legal advances in that, like I mentioned there earlier on, we've had an umbrella organization to work for the legal standing of the communities. And we've got that for the first time, I think, in the history of mobile telephony. A country actually allocated GSM spectrum for social use. This is, as far as I'm aware, is a word, innovation for Mexico. Don't know anybody else who's done it. But we got mentioned in this Diario de la Federación. I don't really know what that would be in English. Where they mentioned that there should be some part of the spectrum given over to these kinds of projects. The communities can use GSM, which was the original point. Was why can't they do it if nobody else is doing it and they've got the phones? And so that happened. It was brilliant. And just very, very recently, there's been an awful lot of interest coming out in these micro GSM systems, which I might mention something about later on. But certain big companies have got their eyes on us, and everybody else is doing the same thing. I think it's a model to go forward with. The equipment costs has just come down so much. Low power GSM things are fine, and it's just really the backhaul stuff that needs to get sorted out. So where are we? Okay, there's a bamboo pole with some GSM antennas on the top of it. This is a community that didn't have the resources to get a tower together in the early days. 3 years on, that community does have a tower. It isn't this one, but there's the old and the new. More new. So that was, spent a lot of time talking to ourselves. Okay, so very, very briefly, we don't tell the community what to do about the money, but we suggest to them that they charge people 40 pesos a month for the use of the phone. And within that, they get free SMS and they get free calls within the community. They can add money then, which just directly goes into their account and directly gets offset against the cost of the VoIP calls. We are planning to bring more VoIP providers into the scene so that we can offer the cheapest possible VoIP rates to everywhere in the world. You can buy by bulk and ultimately get free calls to a lot of landlines. So they organize the system themselves, and like I said, there's an administrator in each community, and they give us 15 pesos of the 40 pesos that gets taken in from the subscribers, which goes towards our model of becoming sustainable and helps us to be able to give them tech support service. What's the time? Okay, so then it leaves me like 12 minutes. Woo! Good. Good. All right, there's our current installations on another map, which I kind of showed you before in the Google Earth thing. If you look at the Google Earth and go into the mountains and just have a look at where these communities are, it's quite cool, you know, when you turn it around and see the mountains. Okay, this is one of the other things that we've done over the last 3 years, is that we've managed to get rid of this little piece here, the Linux call router, which was, this was done by Osmocom developers, paid for by the Shuttleworth support, which was brilliant. So the thing is a lot more simple than it used to be. I'm not really going to go into this. I guess I just put it up there in case it grabs anyone's attention. If you want to really talk about the tech stuff, we can do that later on. Grab me. Yeah, I know. I'm not going to ask for questions on that right now, but later. So there's a pole, the BTS, and a couple of antennas on it. And the Ubiquiti grid link down there. Right, this is the bit where I robbed this from an Irish rock star called Glenn Hansard. I heard him at a gig one time. He said, right, the gig's over, the set list is finished. This is the messy room. You can turn off the stream. You can leave it on. But, you know, this is where, you know, Johnny takes out the crayons and, you know. I don't really know what's going to happen here. I've kind of agonized over the last couple of months about what am I going to say. It's really hard because I have these ideas about what I'm doing. I have an internal conflict in a way. So what I'm going to say next doesn't really, I suppose I should, a disclaimer, it's got, these opinions are not shared with anybody else in Rhizomatica. They're not necessarily even my own opinions. They're just a bunch of stuff that I'm kind of putting out there. And it sort of has to do with the fact that we don't do data in the communities. Like the cell phones don't have GPRS or Edge, or certainly we're not operating 3G or LTE yet. But it probably will come. And when that does come, that means that there's going to be this thing called the internet, which is going to get into the community. Right? And that means that there's going to be companies, the corporate internet as such is going to get in there. And for me personally, it's not something I really want to be involved with. But it's not my decision, because who am I to say whether the communities should get access to the internet or not? In fact, they do have access to the internet, because most of the time, because we've brought the telephony into the community, we're also bringing internet in order to provide the VoIP backhaul and also for us to be able to remotely administer the systems. And so there's some level of internet in communities where maybe there wasn't before. And they open up some little internet cafe, or they have some kind of access, or they have a little place where they put a Wi-Fi point. But it's not quite the same thing as everybody having data on their phones in all their houses, right? So I'm not really very visual. I generally tend to be on the stage with a musical instrument, it's not a laptop. So this is my idea about, there's this thing going on with the internet. You know, the ants were mentioned yesterday a couple of times. I just was looking up about ants, because I had this idea about the internet being sort of the new myrmecology, you know, and the humans are the ants and we're being studied. You know, there's this thing going on with, just had a quick look at it, you know, the ant studies were used in machine learning development and in parallel computing development. And then there's this big data project which is going on, which I read something someplace, which is said that was knowing about what you want before you know what you want. Like, we're studying ourselves. The humans are studying ourselves with the internet right now. The humans. The humans are studying themselves. We are studying ourselves. And like, there's a value in everybody who would be on a social network, for example. But if you've got a whole bunch of people who are on a social network who are all from, let's say, someplace a little bit less diverse than New York City, but some kind of city where, you know, what we get up in the morning, we go buy our Starbucks, and we go to work, and then we go home, and then we maybe watch some TV, and not to say that I'm not making any comment about that, but that's one particular kind of lifestyle. There's loads of people on the social networks that we're like that. That's what we do. You know, we have these general sort of first world lives. And yet there's not an awful lot of people who live in the Sierra Norte de Oaxaca who are on the social networks. And those people have a completely different life. So those people are much more valuable to the social networks due to their scarcity. Yeah? It's just so. And another thing that's kind of ugly about all this is that anthropological studies have been used against people in the past, you know, with so-called maybe counterinsurgency operations in certain countries where certain first world nations have interests. And, you know, people in the communities are kind of aware of that stuff. They don't, there's maybe some spiritual practices that I've heard from people that they don't really want that stuff going out there because it could be misinterpreted, it could be used for publicity, it could be used just for such a simple thing as selling them Coca-Cola, for example. So I'm a little bit worried about what would happen if we bring this technology in, we bring this internet into the communities and the kids get on it and just start sharing a whole bunch of stuff, and then the machine will be watching all of that. I'm not saying there's any kind of malicious intent going on, but there is, that's what we're doing. You know, we're studying ourselves. So the question is there, I'm not really saying anything about it, I'm just hoping to, maybe we can reflect a little bit. I know some people, probably most of you in here are preaching a little bit to the converted maybe, and people are doing some great stuff to make the internet better or think about what we can do to decentralize, to move away from centralized power, to somehow circumvent these things that I'm suggesting. Like Lanier's Siren Servers, I don't know if anybody read that, Who Owns the Future? Jaron Lanier, strange book, but he's got some really interesting ideas about the concentration of power in a network that is centralized, where some point of the network knows what everything else is doing, but everything else in the network doesn't know what everything else is doing. So, yeah. I kind of just mentioned all that. I suppose that was the slide. Information leaks, what I mean there is that information about the community that could in some way in the future be used against them. The value to social networks. The whole kind of always-on culture, you know, this thing where it's sort of individualism in a way is driving this thing to constantly be in communication with everybody else, to constantly update status and all these kind of things that we have going on that are not really a part of community life. And, you know, I call that this addiction to low latency apps. Like, you can do lots of stuff with the internet where it's, you know, high latency. A high latency use of the internet might be, you know, that I would go up to the community and it would say, hey, I'm a goat farmer and I need some information about these, you know, sicknesses that my goats are having. So go back to the city, look that up, print out some stuff, bring it back up. There you go, you know. That's like high latency, but it works. The information gets there. The low latency stuff, things like, you know, updates and Twitter and, you know, I'm walking to the field right now and now I'm having my Starbucks. And it's like, yeah. I'm not really interested in bringing that up there, you know. So what are we missing in ourselves and what could they maybe bring to us if it worked around the other way, going to a more positive viewpoint? You know, maybe what we really, this whole idea of like making the internet bigger and the last mile and connecting everybody else could increase the richness and diversity on the internet by bringing the ancient knowledge and culture into it, which would be good for everybody. But I think we need to be a little bit careful. That's what I'm seeing anyway, because I have a really quick video that I took from a video that's just released last week by a group called Desinformémonos. Let's see if this, no, okay, we need some audio. Do we? Maybe not. No, it's cool. You know what? It's really, really short. No, I'm just going to do this. Unless it's coming out of the audio already.
Yeah, I think it's going to be on HDMI.
That's not working, is it? Hello? Yes.
Eso no quiere decir que se va a pelear con la telefonía, sino la telefonía viene a reforzar esta parte del saber, o sea, saber expresar. Nosotros los zapotecos también tenemos nosotros.
So, I don't know if that worked.
It worked.
Okay. That's a positive viewpoint. That's one of the administrators in Javice. And they're confident that they'll deal with it. And I'm not, so I'm wondering what should we do? So it's kind of an invitation to think about those things, to think about this kind of homogenization process that's been going on a little bit, maybe since even back towards kind of McDonald's or something, where it's much easier for that capitalism to work if everybody's kind of used to the same thing and everybody does the same thing. We can just make the same thing everywhere and not have a diversity. And I see that happening on the internet. The days of the individual home pages are gone, and everybody's presence is homogenized a little bit more, and that's kind of the last slide. I hope I can get a comment or two or some questions. Any questions? Maybe grab me later, but.
How much is the cost of maintaining a network per month?
The cost of maintaining it per month? The maintenance cost would be the cost to the community of the internet connection, which I'm not sure exactly what it is. Depends, I think, on where they are and what service they buy. And if they buy more bandwidth than they need for the cell phone system, I'll look at it. I'll ask. I'll let you know. But it's covered by the cost of what they bring in from the 40 pesos that they get paid for the subscriptions.
Beyond some of the services you shared, that sort of beyond telephony or just voice calls, has there been any work you're trying to combat the encroachment of more corporate services? Is there work on using SMS for Twitter-like platforms, or Craigslist, or Wikipedia, interactive SMS, or even, if you do roll out GPRS, building near, just services that are local, that really get people excited before the more generic stuff comes?
Yeah, well, look, we really haven't done anything with it at all. We haven't looked at it. These are things that have come out. I said, what we should really do is we should really look at building local services within the community first. So when we do turn on data on the networks, we can connect them to their own systems rather than, putting it out onto the internet as such. Because if you do that, you're just gonna, if you go, when new people go to the internet, that's what they find. They find internet.org, etc.
There's a lot of history of platforms that, before the internet was 3G was so plentiful in other parts of the world, there was a lot of work in frontline SMS and things like that are really cool systems that are now not being used anymore that you might need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a parallel project we have going on in Oaxaca City as well as a mesh network, which is something that we're kind of trying not to do too much with because I really want local people to be the ones that get it together. But that mesh network will hopefully involve the generation of lots of local services. Kind of came out of the idea to want to do local TV broadcast. And we said, look, TV transmitters are complicated. Let's put up a mesh network and stream video. So, that thing has a link to the GSM project, in that we can hopefully merge the two and then make it local services.
I detect a certain degree of ambivalence in your whole approach, where you think it's a great idea and simultaneously have deep fundamental worries about what the consequences are of what you're doing.
Yeah.
Just to let you know that I think everyone who's ever built the internet has shared those same fears, that the early stages of getting people on for the first time, sort of, as soon as you see that, you see, oh yeah, like, there's some path that we're going down.
Okay.
That isn't always perfect, but it's always the path, so.
Right. Thanks. Yeah, you did right. I mean, that's why I kind of had said that I'd agonized over what am I saying, how do I present this to people, am I just, because I'd say, oh, this is it, I have it now, and then I go, oh no, people are already aware of that, it's, I can't say that because it's obvious. And they say, oh, maybe it's not obvious, but yeah, you're right, to complete ambivalence. I don't know what we're doing. It's quite funny, actually. It's ironic that most of the people, if not all of us in the Rhizomatica office, are really not cell phone fans at all. Absolutely no way. We hate carrying the things and we're not into the culture whatsoever, but we're all working on this thing to bring phones to the communities. But because they need communication, that's the thing. That's why we like the voice stuff, because they can talk to their family members in the US and vice versa. Not so they can, give all their metadata to Mark. My words. Thank you. Thank you.